Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us in this session of Spokane Public Schools Keep Learning Series for Literacy. Today's lesson is for all our fourth graders out there, and any child who is interested is welcome to join us. My name is Patty Pereira, and I'm a literacy coach at Grant Elementary in Spokane Public Schools, and I will be your teacher for this lesson. I'm so glad you are participating with me today. If you haven't seen our previous lessons, you can find them on the KSPS website. You can still tune in to today's lesson even if you haven't seen our others. Today, we'll be learning more about Sacagawea by using a strategy that will help us experience the journey with her. Let's get started.
Today, we will be revisiting portions of the biography, Sacagawea, written by Lise Erdrich and illustrated by Julie Buffalohead. Remember, our last lesson focused on determining main ideas and supporting those ideas with details from the text. Using this strategy helped us understand the important role Sacagawea played in the success of the very difficult Lewis and Clark expedition. Today's lesson will focus on a strategy that will help us to experience this journey along with Sacagawea and her friends. Let's take a look at our learning target today. I can use text details to create visual images, pictures, in my mind. This will be our main focus, but good readers also use their other senses to experience the text more deeply. You might be asking yourself, how do I do this? I'm so glad you asked. Let's take a look. To create visual images or sensory images, we use our schema, or what we already know from our experience in life, and the text details to create these images. Now you might be asking, why is this important? You ask such great questions. Let's explore the why. When we create sensory images, it brings reading to life for us. Strong sensory images draw the reader into the text. Visualizations make the reading our own. It personalizes it. And through these images, we forge attachments to characters, places, and events. Our sensory images can help us remember and recall what we read. When we create sensory images as we read, we personalize the text and feel a connection to it, like we're part of it. Visualizations and other sensory images create a sense of ownership for us as the reader. Sensory images include smell, sound, taste, and feel. But let's focus in on our target to visualize. You can visualize various stages of Sacagawea's journey to help you identify the main ideas and supporting details at each part of their journey. Descriptive details in the text will help you form clear mental pictures of the people and places Sacagawea and her companions visited. As we read portions of this text, I will stop and we'll have an opportunity to take a look at the details and form mind pictures. We'll also be thinking about how does this help us understand the text more deeply. In order to track our thinking, we'll be using 3-column notes on a piece of paper. I'll pause a moment while you gather the necessary materials for this lesson. All right. Hopefully you have what you need. Please make sure you had your notes with your subject in the upper left-hand corner, like I did mine. ELA, this is actually lesson 2. It's on sensory images. We'll be focusing on visualization on the text Sacagawea. And then on the right-hand side, please make sure you have your name and today's date. If you are creating your own 3-column note on your own paper, make sure the first column is labeled details from the text. The middle column is labeled I visualize. And the last column is labeled deepened my understanding because. I encourage you to work alongside me to fill in your own organizer as I complete mine. Okay, let's get started. It is the early 1800s. Teenage Sacagawea is a Shoshone Indian living in the Knife River villages in what is now North Dakota. When she was a child, Hidatsa Indians kidnapped her from her home in the Rocky Mountains. Since then, she has lived with them on the Great Plains, far from her family. Sacagawea has learned many things from the Hidatsa, including how to grow food. She is now married to French-Canadian fur trapper named Tusani Charbonneau. Meanwhile, Captains Meriwether Lewis and William Clark have been preparing for the Corps of Discovery. They and their team, which includes a large black Newfoundland dog, are about to start a long journey of exploration all the way to the Pacific Ocean. On May 14, 1804, a crew of more than 40 men set off against the Missouri River current in a keelboat and 2 large canoes called pirogues. The Corps of Discovery was underway. The expedition arrived at the Knife River villages at the end of October. They were greeted with great excitement. Sacagawea heard tales of a gigantic black dog that traveled with the explorers. She heard that a fierce and awesome white man with black skin was among the crew. This was York, the slave of Captain Clark. The explorers built a fort and called it Fort Mandan. Then they settled in to spend the winter at the Knife River villages. Lewis and Clark soon learned they would need horses to cross the Rocky Mountains. The people of the villages told them they could get the horses from the Shoshone when the expedition reached the mountain passes. The wily Charbonneau proposed that they hire him as a guide and interpreter. He did not speak Shoshone, but Sacagawea did. He told her they would be joining the Corps of Discovery in the spring. This was exciting news, but Sacagawea's mind was on other matters. She was soon to become a mother. In February, the time came for Sacagawea to have her baby. It was a long, difficult birth. Captain Lewis wanted to help her. He gave a crew member 2 rattlesnake rattles to crush and mix with the water. Just a few minutes after drinking the mixture, Sacagawea gave birth to a baby boy. He was named Jean-Baptiste Charbonneau, but Captain Clark called him Pumpy. Before long, the boy was known to everyone as Pump. On April 7, 1805, the Corps of Discovery started west, struggling upstream on the mighty, muddy Missouri in 2 pirogues and 6 smaller canoes. Pump was not yet 2 months old. As Sacagawea walked along the riverbank, she carried Pump on her back, in a cradle board or wrapped up snug in her shawl. Every member of the Corps of Discovery was hired for a special skill: hunter, blacksmith, woodsman, sailor. As an interpreter, Charbonneau was paid much more than the other members. But his skills as a sailor, guide, and outdoorsman were very poor. The only thing that he did well was cook buffalo sausage. Sacagawea did what she could to help the expedition, even though she was paid nothing. As she walked along the shore with Captain Clark, Sacagawea looked for plants to keep the crew healthy. She gathered berries or dug for wild artichoke roots with her digging stick. Her Shoshone childhood had prepared her well for this journey. The Corps had been traveling less than 2 months when near disaster struck. Charbonneau was steering a boat through choppy waters when a sudden high wind tipped it sideways. He lost his wits and dropped the rudder while the boat filled with water. The expedition's valuables were spilling overboard. Charbonneau was ordered to right the boat or be shot. Let's pause here to create a mental image. I will model the first one for you, and then I'm going to have you give it a go. So when I read that Sacagawea looked for plants to keep the crew healthy, she gathered berries, that she was really trying to do everything she could to help the expedition, it made me create this image in my mind of her tirelessly, like getting up early and foraging through the forest to help everyone else in her group. And this deepened my understanding because it helps me understand that she was a hard worker. She was smart and brave and considerate of others. It helps me know a little bit more about Sacagawea. Okay, now I'd like you to give this a try. I would like you to use these details from the text. Charbonneau was steering a boat through choppy waters when a sudden high wind tipped it sideways. The expedition's valuables were spilling overboard. Use these details to create or visualize an image in your mind. Make sure to jot down your thoughts. on your 3-column notes. I'll give you a moment. Now remember to also record how it helped you understand this part of the story more. All right, so when I read this is what I visualized. I visualized waves crashing over the side of the boat swaying from side to side, and valuables floating in the water. Did you visualize that same thing or something similar? My visualization helped me understand this part more deeply because I'm understanding that this was a dangerous endeavor. The Corps was risking their lives to complete this expedition. They must have been very committed to this task. Did you have something similar to that? Let's keep going. By June, the Corps was entering mountain country. Soon they could hear the distant roaring sound of the great falls of the Missouri. Captain Lewis thought the waterfall was the grandest sight he had ever seen, but there was no way to get past it by boat. It would take the Corps nearly a month to get around the Great Falls and the 4 waterfalls they found just beyond it. The crew built creaky, clumsy wagons to carry their boats and supplies. Battered by hail, rain, and wind, the men dragged the wagons over sharp rocks and prickly pear cactus that punctured their moccasins. One day, a freak cloudburst caused a flash flood. Rocks and mud and water came crashing down the canyon. Sacagawea held on to her son as tight as she could, while Clark pushed and pulled them both to safety. Pomp's cradleboard, clothes, and bedding were swept away by the rushing water, but all 3 were unharmed. By the middle of July, the Corps was once again paddling up the Missouri. They reached a valley where 3 rivers came together, a place Sacagawea knew well. If she was upset to see it again, she did not show it. The captains learned how Sacagawea had been captured and her people killed. Sacagawea recognized a landmark that her people called the Beaverhead Mountain. She knew they must be nearing the summer camp of the Shoshone. Nearly 2 weeks later, Sacagawea walked along the river, scanning the familiar territory. She spotted some men on horseback far ahead of them. Suddenly, Captain Clark saw Sacagawea dance up and down with happiness, sucking her fingers. He knew this sign meant that these were her people, the Shoshone. An excited crowd greeted the explorers at the Shoshone camp. Although years had passed since Sacagawea had been captured, a Shoshone woman recognized her. She rushed up to Sacagawea and threw her arms around her. Sacagawea spent the last days of August with her people. The time passed too quickly. Before long, the expedition had to mount Shoshone horses and continue across the mountains, leaving their boats behind. The next part of their journey almost killed them. The mountain paths were narrow and dangerous, especially once it started to snow. Their feet froze, they didn't have enough to eat, and the mountains seemed without end. Finally, the expedition emerged on the Pacific side of the Rockies. There, Nez Perce Indians helped them make new boats and agreed to keep the horses in case they returned that way in the spring. With great relief, the crew dropped their boats into the Clearwater River and let the current carry the expedition toward the ocean. At the beginning of November, the explorers noticed a sound that could only be the crashing of waves. They had finally reached the Pacific Ocean. The crew voted on where to make winter camp. Sacagawea was allowed to vote too. She wanted to stay where she could find plenty of wapato roots for winter food. They set up camp not far from the ocean in case a ship came to take them back home. But by now, people back east were sure the whole Corps was long dead. No ship came for them. A cold rain soaked the crew as they cut logs and built Fort Clatsop. The hunters went to find game, while Sacagawea dug for wapato roots in the soggy ground. I want to stop there and add to my notes. When I read a cold rain soaked the crew as they cut logs, and that hunters went to find game and Sacagawea dug for roots in the soggy ground, it gave me a picture in my mind. And I want you to listen and watch closely, because next time you're going to have an opportunity to do this on your own. So this is what I visualized. Based on those details, this is what I saw. people working hard in the outdoors despite the weather. Their clothes must have been soaking wet, and they were probably very cold, very uncomfortable. This deepened my understanding because these folks had to work hard to ensure their survival in this new place. They kept going despite the hardships. They had grit. The crew stayed busy all winter, hunting, sewing moccasins, and making repairs on their equipment. Clark made maps while Lewis worked on his report to President Jefferson. Sacagawea watched over Pomp as he began to walk. Captain Clark called him my little dancing boy. He had become very attached to Sacagawea and her son. When the time came, it would be hard for them to part. Spring arrived, and it was time to go back the way they had come. In late March, the Corps of Discovery headed up the Columbia River to retrieve their horses from the Nez Perce. At a place called Traveler's Rest, the expedition divided into two groups. Sacagawea would help guide Clark's group south to Yellowstone River. Lewis's group would head northeast to explore the Marias River. At the end of July, Clark's group came across an enormous rock tower on the banks of the Yellowstone. Clark named it Pompey's Tower in honor of his beloved little friend. In the side of the rock he carved W. Clark, July 25th, 1806. The two groups met on August 12th. 2 days later, Sacagawea gazed once again upon the round earth lodges of the Knife River villages. She had been gone a year and 4 months. Lewis and Clark prepared to return to St. Louis. Before they left, Captain Clark came to talk to Sacagawea and Charbonneau. He offered to take Pomp back to St. Louis with him. He would see that the boy had a good education and would raise him as his own. Okay, readers, now it's time for you to practice your visualizing strategy as I read this next page. I would like you to focus in on this last paragraph. And as I read it, create a mental image of what Sacagawea sees as she watches her friends and companions from the Corps set off down the Missouri. Sacagawea knew that Captain Clark would take good care of her child, but he was not even 2 years old. She couldn't let him go yet. Sacagawea and Charbonneau promised they would bring Pomp to visit Clark in a year or so. On August 17, 1806, Sacagawea watched as the Corps of Discovery set off again down the Missouri River. Her journey of exploration was over, but the Corps of Discovery still had hundreds of miles to go. When you read these details, what images come to your mind? Jot your thoughts down in your notes. When I read that Sacagawea watched as her companion set off down the Missouri River, her journey was over, but the Corps still had hundreds of miles to go, it made me visualize that the trees are lush and green. I can imagine the expressions on the men's faces and the way they are carrying their bodies after months of exploration. They must be exhausted. And I think Sacagawea might have tears in her eyes. I think she could be a little sad. This helps me understand more deeply because I understand that the men are tired and that Sacagawea must be feeling proud, but at the same time, she's sad. This helps me connect with the characters.
I have enjoyed doing some literacy learning with you today. I hope you enjoyed your visualizing experience. Thank you for joining me as you keep learning from home.